Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers to learn about them and the work they do, and hopefully how their experiences could help you in your own writing endeavors. Before I introduce my guest, please take a moment if you haven't already done so. Please hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. And if you like what you hear or see today, depending on whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcatcher in your car, please tell a friend. It is the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. And I, of course, would appreciate that. A nice review on whatever platform you use would also be great. It does help other people find the show, and I also deeply appreciate that. Now, my guest today is the best-selling author of one of the most unique thriller series out there, the Assassins Anonymous series, which features a protagonist who is part of a 12-step program for reformed killers. Kind of like if John Wick or Lawrence Block's Keller or Anton Chigurh decided one day to just stop taking lives for a living. It is, in a word, I would say, fucking great. Okay, that's two words, but you get the point. I'm reading the original Assassins Anonymous right now because as I noted, it's a series, and I think it's great. Rob is a great writer. He's also authored several other books, either solo or with writing partners like I don't know some folks you may have heard of, Alex Segura or James Patterson, or most recently Jeff Rake, who's the creator and showrunner on Netflix's show Manifest. Their new book, DETOUR, which came out earlier this year, is the story of a space shuttle flight crew that returns to Earth only to discover the home they've returned to is not the one they left behind. It is also the first in a series. Rob's also penned numerous short stories, comic books, novellas, and quite a few nonfiction articles in publications like Salon and Writer's Digest, which makes sense given that he was once also a reporter like me. I could go on, and as you know, I often do, but I'm just going to get right to it today and stop talking, and we'll get to the man himself. So please welcome Rob Hart to the open mic. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely the pleasure is mine. Well, let's talk about the new book, which just came out recently, I believe in January, Detour, the
Yes.
one which you co-wrote with Jeff Rake. Tell us a little bit more about it because it's got a really interesting plot scenario.
Yeah, it was interesting how that came about because I just kind of got a call out of the blue one day from an old friend. She's an agent. She's at WME, and she's like, "Hey, I got this guy. He did this TV show Manifest. He's got this pitch. He sold this book to Random House Worlds. He needs a co-writer. Would you be interested in talking to him?" And I knew Manifest, and I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And she sent me the pitch, and it was so cool. It was just like this big swing idea, like weird sci-fi, kind of like a mystery box thing, sort of like Lost, and but rooted in really, really strong character work. And I was like, man, I want to work on this so bad. But you got to get over that final hump of can you actually work with this person? And I figured Jeff is a TV guy, so he's used to working collaboratively, but still, I wanted to meet him. We hopped on Zoom and like that was all she wrote. We were best friends after that. So yeah, it was a super rewarding process. It was a ton of fun. Jeff wasn't familiar with how to write a novel, so I was kind of like teaching him about that process, but he's so good at the way, plot and character intertwine that I was learning so much from him too.
Well, it's interesting to me because, as I noted in the intro, you've worked with a lot of different co-authors. But, this one was some matchmaking, had you ever had an arrangement come together the way this one did?
Not really. I mean, when I got the gig with Patterson, that was because I knew an editor who was, at the publishing house and they were starting this new program, which ultimately kind of fell apart. But I did get to write a novella with him. And that was just like sitting at a bar. And with Alex Segura, he's an old friend. So we're constantly talking about things that we could potentially work on together. So this was definitely a little bit more out of nowhere and unexpected. And occasionally I get people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, would you like to collaborate on something?" Most of the time it comes down to scheduling. You know,
Hmm.
if I'm in the middle of a couple of things, it's hard for me to take on something else. But with this, it was perfectly timed because I had a gap in my schedule and it was also just a really, really exciting project.
Well, and if you don't mind, I gave a little bit of the premise in the in my intro, but tell us a little bit more about the book itself because it sounds fascinating. I actually can't wait to get it and read it because I'm sure you've seen it. I think it's Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix, and I'm not a huge science fiction guy, but I love stuff that has twists, right? I could probably why I'm a
Yeah.
crime fiction noir person, but I love the kind of science fiction that is speculative and has the kind of twist. So, without giving away maybe too much, take us through a little bit of the plot on Detour so people understand, what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, so it follows it's an ensemble book, so it follows a lot of different characters, but the idea is that you've got this one guy, John Ward, who's like I like to describe as Elon Musk if Elon Musk wasn't an idiot. Um so someone who's actually intelligent, who's, funding this exploratory mission to Saturn's moon Titan, which Titan is actually a better candidate for colonization than Mars or pretty much most other places in the universe or in our solar system. And he basically has this crew of people, a couple of astronauts, but a couple of civilians as well, and they take this trip to Titan, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on about the trip, but no one's really sure. And then finally, when they get back to Earth, they realize things are not the way they were when they left. And part of the fun of the book is figuring out exactly what's going on, and it's one of those struggles where like we have to promote the book and we have to explain it to people, but we're also trying to like preserve some of the twists and what's going on. And book promo is just really obnoxious sometimes.
Well, this is the first in a series. Do you, at this point, have an idea of how many books you expect to come out of this, or is it, we're going to take them one at a time?
Yeah, we've got the second book written, and it is being copy edited now. Like I actually just went over it the other night, and Jeff is taking a look at it now. That'll come out presumably this coming January. We're trying to browbeat them into giving us a third book, and at the same time, Jeff is developing this for TV. So, we would love to see it go on television as well. And then, who knows? Maybe it's three books. Maybe it ends up being more than that. We're going to find out.
Oh, well, best of luck on that. Uh, not everyone can work with a co-author. You seem to be quite good at it. So, tell me a little bit about your approach to writing with another person. Do you sit down and work out what the process is going to look like in advance? Is it the same with everyone? Does it change depend on the person? Is it just a scheduling thing like maybe you referenced earlier? How does that look like for you when you try to get something scheduled with another writer to work with?
It definitely, everyone's personality and their process is a little bit different. So, like the little intricacies are always going to be unique. But in large part, a lot of it needs to be done through outlining. You both need a roadmap that you can agree on, so you know you're moving in the right direction. And there's still room to discover things. Like I remember when I was writing Dark Space with Alex Segura, which is another, sci-fi thing, there were points where like we had a really intricate outline for the story, and then one of us would hit a point and be like, "Yo, I just got a great idea. Let's explore this." And for the most part, it would be like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." Or every now and again, one of us would have to be like, "Are we really sure though? Is that really the right way to be going?" But at that point, it's, you just set yourself up a Google Doc and you go back and forth. With both Alex and Jeff, it was great because we both have other things that we're working on. So it's like, I would write a bunch and send it to him and go work on something else. And then, Jeff would work on it and send it back to me and go work on something else. And, you kind of, you find that groove.
Partnerships like this are fascinating to me. I remember when Stephen King and Peter Straub did a joint project together, and they talked about how, one would write a chapter, and then another one, the other one would write the next chapter, and it really took a lot of compromise and things like that. You both write in horror, but they have different styles and all of that. Um, you've worked with some very different authors. I mean, Alex Segura is very different from Patterson, etc. You know, how do the personality things work out in those things? You know, do you read something that one of the partners wrote and you go, man, that's not at all how I would do this. I'm not, we got to work this out. I mean, I imagine that the not maybe conflict, but you know, different perspectives come up a lot. You know, do you ever
Yeah.
struggle to work those out?
Yeah, with Patterson, I mean, I didn't have a lot of interaction with him. I was mostly working through an editor, and whenever I got notes from her, from him, I mean, to me, it was like, this is their thing. Like they're bringing me into it. I'm going to do what they tell me to. Like I'm a hired gun. With Alex, it was a lot of back and forth in terms of, we both knew how to write a novel and we both knew how to tell a story. It was just sometimes trying to decide the best way to tell that story. And with Jeff, because he didn't write novels, he wrote TV, which is sort of like a slightly different language. There were definitely times where he would say like, let's do this. And I'm like, well, we can't really do that because of this, this, and this, for reasons related to novel writing. And he would be like, oh, okay, cool. That's awesome. But the commonality between the three, and even with Patterson, there were times where I was throwing out ideas and they were like, oh, that's awesome. And that's the key. It's like the best idea has to win. If you go into
Yeah.
it with an ego, then it's going to turn into a fight. But if you can all agree that the person who needs to win is the story, and as long as the story is winning, everyone's going to do fine.
Well, the other thing I thought of when I was kind of thinking about all this is I've had several folks on the show who came from TV or who spent a lot of time in TV, and we're seeing more and more thrillers, I think, from writers who've spent a lot of time working in TV, and I noticed the difference in their style right away. Shorter chapters, faster paced, everything. Because with TV you have 22 minutes or you have 46 minutes of total screen time to get your thing across. So every single thing has to be, ba 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 ba, right? Kind of like a machine gun, and it can be very different from writers who are used to having a little bit more freedom to write a more extended chapter or what have you. Um, did you ever uh, run into those situations where it was a just a simple genre thing where you're like, no, we don't have 3-page chapters in books. You need a much longer chapter, what have you.
Well, I mean, you can. Like, you could do anything as long as you make it work. And again, I think I experienced that more with Jeff than anyone else, where it's like, and he talks about how different the process is for him, where it's like, there's so much stuff he doesn't have to worry about. He's like, I don't have to worry what else is in the room. I don't have to worry what's in the sink. I don't have to worry about this and that. That's props, that's costumes, that's all these people. And all of a sudden you're responsible for creating the entire visual language or something, and it's a bit of a heavier lift. Which for me came naturally because that's just what I'm used to working in. So it was kind of fun watching him have to like, modulate and figure those things out sometimes.
Right. Well, as I noted, I'm reading Assassins Anonymous now, and it's action-packed. It has a wealth of humor, uh, and it's really gripping and fast-paced storytelling. I also mentioned the uniqueness of the plot, which is, a group of some of the world's more dangerous people coming together in a program to try to curb their history of murder. Um, I generally hate the where did you get your ideas question, but in this case, I'm gonna break my own rule and ask you because I think it's a really interesting idea, and I'm curious how this one developed for you.
Well, for a very long time, I've wanted to do some kind of story taking like a bunch of assassins and hitmen and sticking them in a room and like having them talk about their feelings, kind of like a group therapy sort of thing. And I always thought that would be funny, but it was one of those ideas that you just kind of like pushed to the back burner in your brain because it wasn't fully formed, it wasn't coming together. I was like, sooner or later it's going to click. And then just one day I thought of it in terms of the recovery process. And, recovery has steps and it has an amends process, which those things create a container for telling the story. Because, sitting in a room and talking about your feelings is kind of aimless. But when you have a goal of I'm trying to get through steps, I'm trying to make amends to people, all of a sudden it has structure. And I mean, as soon as I had that thought, the book came together. So that's the fastest I ever wrote a book. I wrote that book in like 5 months from beginning to end. And it was such a fun process because it's very much suited for my voice, which I like to think is, I like to think of myself as someone who's like, both kind of humorous and heartfelt. Like I care very much about the emotionality of my characters, but I also want them to have a good time. And yeah, it's such a rewarding series. I love writing it.
For those who had not discovered it the way I hadn't, I really recommend it because again, it's really it's fast paced but not rushed, and I really appreciate that as a reader. I don't have nearly as much time to read as I would prefer, so I like to make everything I read count. I tend to read multiple books at a time and everything, and so when one gets me and I go beginning to end and put everything else to the side, that to me is a winner. And so far. Yeah, that one has been dominating my reading time. Um, so I saw you speak this year at Left Coast Crime in San Francisco, and the panel was on, I believe the panel was on writing fight scenes, and
Yeah,
you
it was
really
it was something.
do.
It was like violence.
Yeah, I guess that's what it was. Um, and there is a lot of that right from the get in Assassins Anonymous, and I'm sure the others too. And you really do these very well, as I noted. They're gripping. Um, I've read a lot of Jonathan Mayberry's books, and I think you two are as good at writing those kinds of scenes as anybody I've read. I would say, I hope this doesn't come across as ass kissing here, but I'm serious that this is because I think it's hard to write good fight scenes. It's hard to do them with, you know, both interest, accuracy, uh, sometimes humor, whatever, move the story along all at the same time. Uh, I'm really fascinated by people who write them well. What's your approach to writing a good fight scene for any of your books?
I have this principle that I've been teaching that kung fu movies and musicals are the same, and once you understand that, you can write better. And the idea is that in a kung fu movie or a musical, you take a bunch of characters together and you introduce some conflict, and as the conflict rises, once the emotions get too high, you break out either into song or a fight. And a good song, furthers the plot, tells you about the characters, they're paced correctly, whereas like, the big showstopper number is not going to be at the beginning, it's going to be at the end. It teaches you about the ebb and the flow and the rise and the fall of action and emotionality. And a good fight scene will do that too. A good fight scene will tell you about characters. It will move the plot forward. It's not gratuitous. It's not there just to be there. It's there to it's there because it's the last resort. It has to happen. And I pull a lot from my own life because I train in fighting. I trained in Krav Maga for years. I'm currently training in Muay Thai. So I like to think a decent understanding of what it feels like to, get hit in the face or to be fighting someone and 2 minutes later you realize you're gassed or, hit something too hard and all of a sudden your wrist hurts and, you can't land a solid punch anymore with your right hand. And all these little like the geography of it, like how bodies work just in terms of that kind of physicality. So it's something that I really, really enjoy doing, and I love having that real world experience to do it. I grew up on action movies. I was that kid who was like back before streaming, I was hunting down DVDs of like old school kung fu movies on eBay. So I feel like my entire life has been leading up to my ability to write, somewhat accurate violence.
Oh yeah, I can remember piling into cars with friends to go see drive-in, at the drive-in to see Enter the Dragon and all those things with Bruce Lee and etc. Though me, I'm not a fighter. I'm the last guy you want on your team in that regard. Um, Going back to that panel discussion at Left Coast, because you probably don't remember, I was the guy that asked about how, it annoys me when I read or in a movie see a fight scene and guns are firing everywhere, guns, 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 and then everybody can still hear perfectly well. They walk away and everybody's fine, right? And I've had guns go off next to my head. You are not fine. You don't hear well, and so I'm. It's that little bit of realism which you just touched on to some extent, how, yeah, you hit something and now your right hand's useless because maybe you just broke a knuckle or whatever. Maybe share that a little bit more of that perspective on the cost of violence to the perpetrators or the actors in these kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, no, I
Carrying it through
remember.
to your reader.
Yeah, I remember that question very specifically because it was a great comment. Yeah, people, there is sometimes a lack of reality in people who write action and violence, which, to a degree, look, there's no secret society of assassins in a recovery program in this world. So obviously what I'm doing already has like a kind of like a lack of reality to it. But I do think I do like grounding it in details that are important to me. Again, there's a reason that I wrap my fists before I fight. It's because it means less giving your wrist, and it means it keeps the bones more tightly packed in your fist, so you're less likely to injure yourself. If I was ever in a street fight, I would strike with an open palm over a fist because there's a higher chance of like if I hit someone in the side of the skull, I'm gonna break a finger, and that's not good. That means I can't type. It's uh it's little things like that that bring the reality of, yeah, guns firing and being really loud and messing with your hearing. There's a lot about that in itself where, people get this idea that like everyone could be John Wick if they just really try, when the reality is most people, if they have a gun in their hand, if they're firing it, they're going to start having a fear response. They're going to have this massive dump of all these, chemicals that really screw with your fine motor skills. It gets harder to pull a trigger when
Yeah.
you're afraid or overstimulated. Or when you're talking about knives. I mean, the best knife defense in the world is to run away because there's no way to defend against a knife in which you're not going to get cut. It's like I honestly, like if I was in a street fight situation, I would rather defend against a gun than someone who had a knife. Because with a knife, you just have to hope you don't get cut so much that you die. Whereas a gun, again, guns can misfire. People get all wonky when it comes to pulling the trigger. And also, if you're close to someone with a gun's only dangerous in one direction, whereas a knife is dangerous in multiple directions. So it's a lot of I like adding that level of reality because I think it just makes it feel, more. It introduces that heaviness to the reader.
Yeah.
I don't like to treat violence as, obviously I'm playing from a point of, big action scenes and this is supposed to be fun and thrilling and entertaining, but violence also carries weight. It's dangerous. It could hurt people. And I wanted to, especially with the Assassin series, I was trying to play with this idea of, maybe we should give more consideration to all those people that John Wick is shooting in the head because, we watch the movies and I love the movies. And every single person he kills, it's like, oh, how cool was that? But in the reality, like maybe that person had a family or maybe that person,
Yeah.
that was the only chance they had to make money or they were trapped or whatever. There could be a million reasons why they're there that aren't just, they woke up one day and decided I'm going to be a bad guy. Like maybe it's the only opportunity they had. And, I think it's good to be more mindful of, both the way violence impacts people, but also the choices that people make.
I'm fascinated by hitmen. I think a lot of readers are. And the three that I mentioned earlier are very much they're all great. Yeah, John Wick, Keller. These are great characters, and that's why they're multiple units of their, whether it's movies or books or what have you. But I think the reason I'm so grooving on what you've written is because there is that acknowledgement of humanity that, I take lives and your characters, not just Mark, but all of them they've come to the end of the road with that. And they're trying to find some way to make amends for their behavior. And, whereas, Anton Chigurh has no, it's like he has no conscience at all. He's just a killing machine. He doesn't care who or how, right? And I do think, back one more step, my brother was a cop. And so, yeah, I've heard all the stories of, homeowners shooting themselves or shooting a family member in a dangerous situation because, yeah, the adrenaline, all of the things that happen, and all that tough guy stuff goes out the window and they shoot themselves in the foot or something, or
Yep.
they shoot a hole through the wall and they shoot their neighbor, right? Because that's why soldiers, cops go through so much training. You have to overcome that part of your brain that does that brain dump, and so you can perform in the whatever it is that you're supposed to perform with this deadly weapon in your hand. And so I'm fascinated by that whole concept of these guys have really got in touch with their humanity and they're trying to anyway after a life of ending other people's lives. I think it was a really fascinating concept.
Yeah, well, Chigurh is interesting because there was someone did a study on the most accurate portrayals of psychopaths in film, and Chigurh was number one. Hannibal Lecter apparently was much lower on the list, but Chigurh is apparently the most accurate presentation of a psychopath, which I love. But it's also kind of interesting because you look at him and you look at John Wick, and they're both effectively doing the same job. They're being hired to kill people, but John Wick is a good guy and Chigurh is not. And that's that line in the middle is what's interesting to me because at the end of the day, like killing people's bad,
Yeah.
like but the in the realm of like the assassin and the hitman character, as a viewer and a reader, we kind of decide like, well, killing people's bad, but killing some people is okay. Like, but then what's the line? Like, which kind of person is it okay to kill versus not? It's like, can you kill a murderer? Can you kill a rapist who didn't kill the person? Like, can you kill it's just it's a big wobbly gray area and that's why that's part of the reason I wanted to play in this because it's fascinating from a moral perspective.
Yeah. You know, so you teach in an MFA program, I believe it's Seton Hill University.
Yes.
What is the biggest challenge you see for most young or beginning writers that you work with? Is there one thing or maybe a few things that you see most of them struggle with as they're learning to craft interesting stories?
I mean, one thing, like, I don't know, you got like 3 hours. We can. No, there's a couple of things that I can tell you right off the bat. The first and this is something that the short story writer Amy Hempel told me a long time ago, which I really believe is that the biggest mistake that new writers make is wanting to publish more than wanting to write well. And so, like, there's this desperation to like get a book in your hand. And so you start cutting corners or skipping over things, or you move over to like self or vanity publishing for work that's not necessarily ready for prime time. I mean, self-publishing can work. And if that's the path you want to take, that's the path you want to take. But the reality is most self-published books that I've read were half-baked or three-quarters done. Like they needed more work. And that's why they didn't get picked up by a major publisher. I'm constantly and having worked there for years now, the number of students who, when they start, they're like, "Oh, I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser. I need the joy of discovery. Like, I don't like outlining is dumb." And then by the time they get to the end of the term, they're like, "I should have outlined." And I'm like, "Yeah, you should have." Like, I actually think the ability to outline is one of the most basic and important things you can do. I know a few writers who can pants, who can truly just sit and write. I think it's actually a very, very rare talent.
Hmm.
But we get
Hmm.
this weird thing where people are like, I'm in one club or the other. And it's like, no, like one club is exclusive and hard to get into and you need like I can't even do that. And I'm decently good at what I do, but it's complicated, it's hard, So I think more people need to learn how to outline. And then there's a lot of it's a mix of there being a lot of misinformation out there and people not knowing who to listen to and also not necessarily listening to the right sources. Like I've had people say stuff to me that's like completely off the wall. And I'm like, that's not true. And if you would ask someone who knew what they were talking about, then you'd know that wasn't true. But the fact that you've accepted it as fact, it's like, oh, if you work with a big publisher, they're going to change your title and they're going to make you rewrite the whole book and they're going to do this and they're going to do that and they're going to take away all your creative freedom. And I've never experienced anything like that. Like if anyone's ever said, "Hey, we should do this differently," it's always for a good reason, and they're usually right. And if they're not, or I feel differently, I tell them and then we talk about it. But it's just the level of misinformation out there is stunning. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of people who like to pretend they know what they're talking about because they're trying to like build a brand. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm going to give advice even though I haven't actually accomplished anything.
Right.
And then I just have to sit there and explain like, no, no, that is like, no, you can't write 3 chapters and sell a book. You have to finish the book and then you sell the book, like stuff like that.
Yeah, they get confused. I mean, if you're writing nonfiction and you're going to do a proposal and yeah, maybe 3 chapters and the proposal will do it. But in fiction, that's like 101. You've got to not only, and in this day and age in particular, not only does the book have to be finished, it better be really, really highly level edited. It better, you can't have any of these goofball mistakes because the industry has winnowed down quite a bit. And so I think it's a really great point. Be careful who you listen to. And don't, it's funny. If people that listen to the show have heard me say this a lot. Um, you know, when folks ask me about writing, because I know I do the show or whatever, I said, look, the only thing I know is this. You got to decide for yourself what it is you want out of it. Okay? If the only thing that will make you happy is a New York agent and a big five publisher, great. That's fantastic. Incredibly hard to do, but great. Worthy goal. If all you care is you get it done and your mom likes it, that's great too. It's what you want out of it, but you just have to understand that the higher up the, the achievement ladder or whatever, the harder it gets, and you can't get discouraged if you're setting your sights on the moon, right? That's just how it is. And so, that's the only advice I can ever give anybody because what the hell do I know, right? So I'm kind of with you. Be careful who you listen to, because I've talked to writers who have let their writers group talk them in circles until,
Yeah.
with everyone's got a different opinion and they're trying to please those people instead of writing the story that they wanted to write. And, one writer in particular that I know, once she basically stopped getting bullied by the guy in her writers group, she ended up getting a 2 book contract out of the chute, but it was because she actually went back and wrote the story she wanted to write. And it was actually really good. They're great books. And so it's a tough game, but yeah, logic should dictate that you don't listen to that guy that doesn't have any credits to his name.
Yeah, I mean, look, like everyone has, it's always worth getting input and getting opinions, but not all opinions are correct. Like I've had people suggest like completely ridiculous things to me, and I'm just like, that's fine, that's cool. I'll listen to anything, but whether or not I take it is going to depend on whether or not it serves me. And you're right, it's so hugely competitive. It's so hard, and part of the problem too is that like if you look at my social media, if you look at the social media of any author, it's like, oh, here's the deal memo for my latest book. Here's I got this option by Steven Spielberg. Like this, I got invited to speak at this event. I got this, I got that, I got this. I don't talk as much about my failures, but the reality is that for every success I've had probably about 10 to 15 failures. And that's where social media can kind of like get in your head because you see people doing all this great stuff and you don't see all the work behind it that got you there. And that's why I try to talk about that too, because it's like, man, the number of projects I've worked on that have died, sometimes I just get sad because I remember like, oh man, that would have been so cool to work on. That would have been awesome. But it didn't work out. But you know what? This other thing did work out, so that's okay. It's
Yeah.
uh it's once you start comparing yourself to other people, that's when it starts getting real dicey.
Yeah. My agent has my current work in progress. It was out all last year. Lots of sniffs, no bites. And so she suggested, hey, in this situation in the past, I've used this particular editor. She had this role in the Big Five for a long time. Not cheap, up to you, but here's what's worked out. And so I bit the bullet, ended up doing a major overhaul revision. It was more of a tense thing, not so much plot structure, but I said, you're the expert here. So I spent the money, and now Liz is getting ready to put it back out again. We'll see if this year's any different, but You know, I think when I was younger, I don't know that I could have done that. You get ego invested in things, and I have face planted so many times doing this that I've just learned, well, okay, clearly you don't have all the answers, so why don't you, trust the people that have been doing this for a very long time that actually have a long track record of success when they're telling you this isn't going to work. This is the best path I know of for you if you want to do it. Okay. I
Yeah,
again, my younger self would have said, "No, I think I know better." But guess what? I didn't. Shockingly, I didn't know better.
yeah.
Um, so Peter Abrahams has been on my show before, and a lot of folks know him by his pen name now, Spencer Quinn, because he writes the Chet and Bernie series. And he told me once that for him, a good story has to have a consistent heartbeat, a through line of some kind that makes the reader care about the characters enough to get to the end. Now, and what creates that kind of heartbeat could be different for everybody, right? Genre, etc. What creates that kind of a heartbeat and through line for you, both as a reader and as a writer? And I'm curious if it changes with genres or formats because, as I noted, you've done science fiction along with, with thrillers, you've done comic books, these other things. What creates that through line for you?
That's interesting. I never really thought about it in those terms, but I really like that. I mean, I think it's a combination of you have to both care about a character, but also kind of see a little bit of yourself in that character. Um, with Mark in the Assassin's books, I made a very, very deliberate decision. Mark is very funny. He's very charming.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a joker, and I like that about him because I mean, first the juxtaposition of this guy who is literally one of the most deadliest people in the world, who is also just like kind of funny and kind of silly, just makes me laugh. Like it's entertaining to me, but it's also important because he is an assassin who got into a recovery program. You get into a recovery program because you hit a rock bottom. So what does a rock bottom look like for an assassin? And obviously you don't want to say because that's one of the twists of the book, but he does something really, really bad halfway through the book. And I knew that if the reader didn't love him, like really, really love him and root for him, they would walk away from the book in that moment. Or they would just have a much harder time keeping through with his story.
Hmm.
So I think it's finding those anchors, finding those emotional moments where, you can identify because when you can laugh with someone, you can identify with them, and so finding those moments of identification where the reader really wants to just stick with this character and so someone who's reading it is obviously like, you're reading it and you're not an assassin.
Right.
But I think you can probably see some things in Mark that feel familiar, like that, sometimes feeling like, stressed out or lonely, or, wanting to be good at something, seeking praise, kind of getting locked into cycles without being able to break out of them. It's finding those little like universal commonalities, I think, that really key readers in and keep them glued to the page. Because that's the thing. It's like I've got so many ideas. Like I don't have a deficit of ideas, I have a deficit of time. But, sometimes I look back through my idea file and it's like, this is a cool hook, but I don't have a character to carry it. Like Assassins Anonymous was cool until I thought of Mark. And then it was like, oh, okay, this is how this is the mechanism through which we carry this idea.
Hmm.
So it's character is king. It's like the most important thing.
Yeah, that I agree with completely. Um, Humor, we've talked a little bit about humor. Does humor come naturally for you, or is that something you had to work on to develop in these characters?
I See, I always feel bad saying it because it's like you can't really say that you're cool, like but like it's hard for me to say like I'm a pretty funny guy. Like I think I'm funny. I'm a bit of a wise ass and yeah, I'm a big fan of humor. I'm a big fan of comedy. So it's kind of finding that pattern, and I just think about the way that like I talk with my friends or, whenever my goal whenever I'm doing a panel, like when I was at Left Coast or something, it's like I just need to say like three clever things and make people laugh two or three times. Like if I could do that, get in, get out, make sure everyone else has an opportunity to speak, I'm golden. Like that's it. And then I'll be memorable. So it's yeah, it's I do keep it in mind a lot in terms of how you can use it as a mechanism to connect with people. But I like to think that I'm a naturally, somewhat funny person.
I do think people who speak in public a lot, which I do as well a lot, you know, you develop it a lot because it's a great disarming way to connect with an audience.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I've worked in DC and around and stuff in my career as a reporter, and I've moderated panels and all these things. I do it quite a bit, and yeah, my wife thinks I'm hilarious. So the spouse always gets a pass for thinking whatever. I don't know if anyone else does, right? But it's the same thing. I use humor a lot in my, I work a lot with younger people and stuff too, the young reporters, and I find that reaches them better than a lot of other things. But, you know, translating it to writing is tough. See, that's the thing. A lot of us may have that kind of natural stuff, but it's harder when you sit down to write, I think. And so I always really admire writers who can work humor into their writing, and it feels as natural as when I hear you talking. And that's really an
Yeah.
accomplishment.
And that's something that I like. I do a lot of freelance editorial work, and so I see a lot of people like trying to work humor in where it becomes like, just overdone or too much, or it just feels inappropriate for the moment, it's kind of like it's like a dial that you're kind of modulating. You're trying to get the
Hmm.
right frequency. Sometimes getting that right frequency takes a little bit of play, but yeah, humor is such an important form of connection. There's something that another thing that I teach a lot is authority, right? Is that, you as an author have authority and your characters have authority. And there are two kinds of authority. There's head authority and there's heart authority. And head authority is like, Sherlock Holmes or Jack Reacher, being enormously talented to the point that it's almost supernatural. Sherlock Holmes is the smartest guy in every room. He knows the answer to every question. So he has authority. When he says something, you believe it. Reacher, wins every fight, knows every weapon. He has authority. You put him into a fight, you know he's going to win. But then heart authority is more, honesty and emotional vulnerability and humor. It's those things that open us up and make us more vulnerable. And so if as an author you can demonstrate authority and your characters can demonstrate that authority, your reader is going to be so much more trusting and you can basically take them wherever you want at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny too. Last thing on this is I've bought books by comedians, actual comedians, and that they're billed, laugh riot, yeah. And I never make it past a couple of chapters because it's like,
Really?
well, because they're trying too hard,
Yeah.
right? I much prefer humor that is weaved in the natural way. And again, I mentioned my brother was a cop. I've had many friends who worked in ERs or were paramedics, and there is a gallows kind of dark humor that people in those situations have naturally. And you get it. It's a coping mechanism. I mean, some of the other stories my brother told me about his time, are just horrifying, right? If you couldn't find some outlet for that, I don't know how you could do that job, right? And so I
Yeah.
see it in writing, especially characters like yours or so many of the others I've read that its humor is such again, it's that relief valve, right? And it's so natural. When I see, when I'm reading writing that is meant to be yuckity yuckity yuck yuck yuck, I could probably see that stand up and it'd be great, but reading it doesn't do anything for me the way reading it in a story. And maybe I'm the only one that feels that way. But yeah, I've just, books by comedians are off my list now. So, um,
Interesting.
really, this is maybe just a quick question. How do you describe your first draft of anything? What's your perspective on your first draft? Because I think that flummoxes a lot of people.
Oh God, first draft is garbage. Um, that's I like to think of it as, writing a book is kind of like taking a big lump of clay and shaping it into a sculpture. It's a lot of you know, delicate, scalpel work. It's sometimes like hitting it with a sledgehammer to take away big pieces. And at the end of the day, hopefully you're left with something that looks really cool. But like it's like making that lump of clay when like you're mixing like the dirt and the sand and the water and then whatever else. That's the part of the process I kind of hate. It's like when I'm doing that first draft and like looking at a blank page and trying to create something out of nothing, I'm like, this is the worst. When I have it on the page and then I can sit there and kind of like mold it and reshape it, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like this is exciting. This
Mhm.
part I like doing. But yeah, I think the first thing you need to understand as a writer is that you just have to accept your first drafts are always going to be garbage. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, every time, and that's fine. Like that's again, like the arts and the editing.
Right, right. It's like making a movie. You shoot all the scenes and then you make your movie. It's all
Yeah.
done in editing. Um, so this is the last serious question I have for you. Because the newest book, now I mentioned the new book, Detour, which came out in January, but you've got another book coming out in June, which is the latest in
Yes.
the Assassins Anonymous series, Three Hitmen and a Baby. Those of us old enough to remember the movie Three Men and a Baby catch the obvious play on that title, but tell us a little bit about the new book, which, like I said, I believe comes out in June.
Yeah. So it's the third book in the series, and it was I just thought it would be really funny. You've got this group of assassins. They're in the recovery program, and one of them, Valencia, has a baby, Lucia, and Lucia in the book I think is like two, and she has to go do something. Like she has to fly to California. They're based in New York, and she needs someone to watch the kid. And so Mark and Astrid and Booker, like three members of the group, they're like, oh, why don't you just let us do it? Like, we're three of the most dangerous people in the world. We could watch a baby. And then turns out they are not suited to watch a baby. But it brings back some stuff from the first book, some characters from there, and some things that happened to Mark. So it was super, super fun to write because it felt like, again, like I'm always trying to approach this from a slightly different direction than normal. And the other thing that was fun about it too is that the first two books are kind of heavy. The first book, you're dealing with like Mark's ego death and all of and his like, the suicidal ideation that he struggles with and all this stuff. The second book is about sex trafficking. There's like a Jeffrey Epstein like figure in that book. The third book, I was like, oh, this is, you know what? If my readers have stuck with me this long, they deserve to have some fun. Like, we're just going to do a romp. We're just going to make this like, over the top and silly and fun. And then I got halfway through the draft and I'm like, oh no, this is getting real heavy again. Um, but yeah, it was a blast to write. Like, but it's funny the way this process works because I'm now finishing the fourth one. So there's a little bit of me too that's trying to remember, like, what did I even write in the third one? Like, what happened?
Well, I can't wait to like I say I'm loving the first one. Gonna get right on the next one, and then I'm sure I'll read the third one. So I always like to end the show on a fun, what I hope is a fun question. I always mean for it to be a fun question. So I'm going to give you three people, three names of, let's just say I'm the kind of person I can put you together with one of these three people, living or dead, and you can choose which one you would want to spend some time with, go whatever, having a drink, talking murder, whatever the case may be. There's usually a theme. Most people figure it out pretty quickly. You tell me which one you would choose and why. The options I am going to give you are these are names probably the vast majority of people out there are not going to know who any of these people are. This is one I actually had to do a fair amount of research on to get these. So, look, it's either, I believe it's pronounced Locusta, who is a notorious poisoner of the poisoner of the Roman Empire. That's one. Uh, the Brazilian hitman Julio Santana, who was credited with or suspected of killing almost 500 people during his career, or Hassan Isaba, who was the founder of the sect Order of Assassins back in the 11th century. Normally, that's pretty obvious what the through line is there. Normally, people have to guess a little bit. Obviously, they're all assassins. You could spend some time with any one of these three people. Who would you choose and why?
This has got to be the most bizarre and deep cut question I've ever gotten in a podcast, and I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. I think that's so cool. Right off the bat, I would go with the third guy, because I did a little bit of research into the origin of assassins, and a little bit of that comes up in the second book in the Medusa Protocol. Into they were the Al Hashashin, which was supposed to be like a derogatory name, like users of hashish, because they were so feared and so renowned that people started creating stories trying to take away some of that power. Um, and yeah, so and also like someone who lived during the 11th century, like I would just be very curious to know what that was like.
Yeah, again, I had to do a little research this myself, but I thought, oh, God, now that these are three fascinating options. So I'm glad you liked the question because,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It's always fascinating for me to talk to writers. I really hope folks who watch the show or listen to the show are learning something that'll help them in their own writing. I don't want to bore anybody in getting into all the, do you pants or do you plot? I used to ask those kinds of questions, but in this day and age, I really prefer to learn more about how writers approach the craft of writing because it's different for everybody. So I
Oh
very much
yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
no, I love talking about it because you're right. Everyone approaches it differently, and I think the important thing to remember is that everyone has to approach it differently in the sense that something that works for me might not work for you, might not work for, Cindy Lou who is listening to this show and does it differently. So
yeah.
it's just, process is like a fingerprint, but I think it's really fun to listen to other people's stuff and say, okay, I'm going to pick out what works for me. I'll discard the rest, but I
Hmm.
might hear something here that like, oh, cool, I want to try that and see what happens.
Yeah, and just to stay on the theme for just one more second, I often make jokes. It's like, hey, this is a lot less expensive than buying 100 craft books.
Oh
But
yeah.
but really, there's value in a lot of those books. But I think one of the differences is very much like what you were just saying. I think a lot of those books are telling you this is the way to do it. And there is no one way
Yep.
to do anything. You can take something from those books too. There's lots of things that help you develop as a writer. I tell you, I've always been able to write words and write sentences and be a fairly cogent, writer. But I was at this a very long time. Again, I'm a reporter. I've been writing words for a living for a long time, but writing fiction is different from writing nonfiction. Length is different. Short stories are different from novels and etc. There's lots of ways and lots of things to learn. And I think as long as you continue to believe that there's things for you to learn, you have a chance to grow. And if you don't want to do that, this is also the wrong field to try to get into because it changes all the time.
Yep. Exactly.
Think about how much has changed just in the last 5 years or 20 years. It's crazy. But
Oh yeah.
anyway, Rob, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. Before we go, I'm going to tell everybody the same thing. If you haven't hit subscribe, please do so. If you think this was valuable and you have a friend who wants to be a writer, maybe share this information with them so they find the show. I'm on YouTube, obviously, if you're watching on YouTube. Also, all the podcatchers. And by all means, check out Rob Hart's books because man is an excellent writer. Obviously, he's very intellectual in the way he approaches all this. So I think you would do yourself a great favor. And the last thing I will tell you, same thing I tell you every time, which is tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So whatever it is you're doing today, make it count. For my guest, Rob Hart, and for me, Rich Eisen, thanks for joining me here on the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words. We will see you next time.